Welcome into another episode of the Fat Guy Podcast. I'm the Fat Guy. Most people just call me Brett. Glad to have you along today. If you get some sort of value out of the podcast, I just never mention this, but I think I'll mention it on today's podcast. You can support the time that I put into, it's not just the podcast, but the endless time I put into research and study and all this kind of stuff. Not to mention being a guinea pig and testing things out on myself. So I generally know what I'm talking about. One, because I've read the literature extensively. Two, because I've learned how to determine what's good research and bad research. And three, because I just try stuff on myself. So nevertheless, I'm not a doctor by any means. I can't give professional medical advice or anything like that. This is just my opinion. That's all this podcast is my opinion. Nevertheless, if you've gained something from it, if you want to buy me a cup of coffee, or maybe you want to buy me a chicken breast this month, head on over to Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/fatguypodcast. And there's a way to just chip a token dollar at me. And it's really appreciated. And you get a little extra for it. As a matter of fact, I just posted a little extra on there this past weekend, which is talking about constipation and fiber in the diet, and the shocking study that I found that will blow your mind about, regular bowel movements and fiber that turns everything you've ever heard, learned, or known upside down with solid scientific research. But I digress. We're talking about fat chin, fat neck. What does it mean? So I'm talking about this because I just read a study 2 days ago from 1998, Berenstein et al., where they followed a group of people, two groups of people actually, for 7 years to test mortality. And one of the factors that they looked at was fat accumulation around the neck. So, these people, like, they don't have a chin, like right up under their chin is this big hanging down round, like you don't see their neck. You just see this round hanging. They just have this round, soft fat all the way from their chin to their neck. And then they have neck fat, which you see on the back, and you'll see like little rolls on the back. And so they tested several things over the course of the 7 years. Obviously, they checked in at the beginning of the 7 years. They checked in again at 3 years, and then they checked in again at 7 years. And what they found, shockingly, was a 47% increase in relative mortality for the people who carried the neck and chin fat. So why might this be, you might ask? Well, I think several factors involved, but I think probably the simplest explanation is, and this is just me basing off everything that I know about how fat is stored and about the metabolic process. The body starts storing fat when you start getting overweight. The body starts storing fat where it's supposed to store it, and it has places that are natural. These differ a little bit between men and women. Women obviously have breasts where they store fat. They also obviously have hips where they store fat. Bodies are a little bit different, but nevertheless, men and women have places where you initially store fat in healthy amounts. And everybody has a different number of fat cells. And contrary to belief, you don't grow new fat cells. You just, whatever the number of fat cells you have, that's the number of fat cells you'll always have. And what happens is they get fuller and fuller and fuller until the ones in this area can't be any more full, and then we start getting fat in other places. And so what we know is adipose tissue is generally the first to fill up. And once it moves beyond that, it starts moving into visceral fat, which is the most dangerous fat. And you'll see some people who have no ability to store visceral fat, and we talked about this in another episode. If you're not a subscriber to the podcast, I recommend you subscribe, because you can go back and easily look at previous episodes, but you'll see where we talked about skinny fat or TOFI, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. And these are people who just weren't born with a lot of fat cells to store adipose tissue, which is the fat right under the skin. And so their body immediately starts storing it as visceral fat. And these are the people that die in their 30s, and you're like, wow, they look so healthy and they were thin and all that, but they weren't thin. They had maxed out their body's fat potential, and all the fat was stored as visceral fat around their organs, and it just killed them much more quickly. That's one of the weird things about it. You can actually check your fat and see if you're... Now, this is no reason to not try to lose weight, so just get that out of the way right up front. But if you have the belly and it's shakily and jiggly, you're way healthier than these fat people. You'll see that they have the big bellies, but it's hard. Like there's no flat, there's no floppy, no jiggly. These are the people that all that fat is coming from visceral fat from the inside pushing out. They don't have a lot of adipose tissue. That's fat right under the skin, and that's fat that's relatively healthy for you. It's keeping you alive, and it's keeping you from getting sick. And this is another reason that you'll see the people who are skinny fat die sooner than people who are fat, because fat actually is a protective way. When you're overeating, you're consuming too much sugar, accelerated triglycerides, extended acceleration, levels of insulin and all this stuff. So your body's way of dealing with that is storing it in adipose tissue. So for fat people with jiggly fat, they were born genetically with a lot of fat cells. And the body stores it there, and so it's protective against that visceral fat, which does the majority of the damage internally. Whereas these people who are skinny fat, and they don't have that jiggly fat, their belly is pretty tight, but it's big. It sticks out front, kind of like a pregnant belly, and it's not jiggly. All that's from visceral fat, and that means you've maxed out your options rather quickly, and you're much nearer to death. So it's kind of one of those conundrums where actually the more quote-unquote disgusting-looking fat is actually better for you. What does that have to do with this? Well, it's the order in which body stores fat, and when your body moves to store fat under the chin and on the back of the neck, chin fat, neck fat, it's already exacerbated your adipose tissue in the belly and the thighs, hips, etc. for the most part. It has now moved to look into other places to store fat, and it's found you have fat cells in your neck and under your chin, and it's filling those up. And the next step is the maxing out of the visceral fat, which is the most dangerous fat that kills you the quickest. You probably already have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, but it's going to max out to the point that your liver is incapable of working. Your pancreas will be incapable of working. It'll either just stop working, or it'll just be unable to keep up with demand. You'll probably be on exogenous insulin, which will continue to deteriorate your arteries, cause insane amounts of inflammation. All this stuff progressing you sooner and sooner to death. So I just thought it was an interesting study, and I thought it was something to be of concern of. There's a loved one in your life, or it's you, and you're looking in the mirror, and you're like, I don't have a neck anymore. It's just big, hangy, soft fat, and my back, around my chin, from my chin to my neck. And you look at the back of your neck, you got fat rolls. You're approaching dire health consequences. Things are about to take a turn very negatively for you. If you haven't already been diagnosed type 2, you will be soon. If you haven't been diagnosed with severe non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, you will be soon. Probably kidney dysfunction is probably in your near future. The havoc that you're wreaking on your endothelial lining in your arteries, and the damage you're doing to the heart, the damage you're doing to the mitochondria, the brain cells, which is going to bring, has a higher chance of bringing autism, not to mention stroke and all these things. They're around the corner. And so you have entered a new level of being closer to being extremely sick and closer to death. And I don't say this in any kind of glib way, because I'm closer to death than most. My way to something I've worked on, made great strides with it, had a setback, making great strides again, but I don't know. That's somebody asked me the other day. They're like, well, how much time do you think you've added to your life by you eating better and getting rid of the carbs and trying to keep and I'm like, I don't know that I've added any. I was so bad for so long. It's quite possible that I shortened my life so much that any improvement will only just, halt me at that level of damage. I don't know that I could improve it more, but I'm trying. I could die tomorrow, and deservedly so, probably, from the way I lived. So all you can do is first have the knowledge, to take the action, and then you just hope for the best, which is what I'm doing. Nevertheless, I hope this information has helped you in some kind of way. If it has, thank you so much. One of the easiest, simplest, and free things you can do to help me out is to go to whatever source you got for this podcast. primarily Apple Podcast. That's where you get the big influx of listeners from. And rate it. Give a 5-star and say, hey, I really enjoy this podcast. He's helped me. He's informative. He's knowledgeable, etc. Whatever kind words are always appreciated. And follow us on social media. Fat Guy Podcast is the username. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all that. Fat Guy Podcast. And you can shoot me a message as well. And I'll throw in another tag for Patreon. I never do that. Patreon. Patreon.com/Fat Guy Podcast. And there's a nifty way you can chunk a few dollars at us if you think we do something worthwhile. I sure appreciate you listening today. I hope it helped. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks so much.